Please welcome Jeep Barnett, Kyle Davis, and Adam Foster from Valve.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jeep. This is Adam and Kyle. And we've worked on some various alternate reality games at Valve. And if you don't know what an ARG is, don't worry, because I don't really know either. But for the purpose of this talk, we're just going to say it's sort of a metagame that involves community investigation across many forms of media. So before we get into specifics, let's talk about why we thought it was valuable to spend our time running these ARGs and some reasons you should consider it. So first, they help us solidify our fictional universes by cross-referencing things that appear in the games that we make. And they also allow us to expand the fiction in ways that aren't always possible within the constraints of the game. Inevitably, fans will latch onto these crazy theories about our games, and so ARGs have given us a way to use retrospect to vindicate their observations, tie up loose ends, and sort of double down on the things that are really resonating with them. For Portal, it's given us a chance to get hands-on with antique computer technology, and this research has been really helpful in helping us with sort of the dialogues and sort of the weird aperture science fiction of things. And I think that historical research can be applied to other types of genres as well. So, if you're making a fantasy game, you might want to, research ancient spell books and witchcraft or whatever, and, show how those tie-ins work and, give the players a chance to connect with the real-life aspects of what's going on and how they're tied into your fiction. So, we love shipping incremental new content, and this has been a great way to create events that get players excited about that content we're building. Doing blog posts or a trailer is a great expository way to communicate with fans, but we work in an interactive medium. So ARGs are a communication channel that calls for players to interact and take ownership over this information. And finally, it's given us a really useful way to reward our most loyal fans with cool backstory and concept art and just stuff like that. So here's the ARGs I'm going to talk about today. The mechanics and technical details involved are kind of insane. So I'm going to do a very high-level overview, and that way you guys have plenty of time to drill into whatever specific details or questions you have and what you're most interested in. So let's jump right into it. After the Orange Box and Portal were announced, there was actually some confusion about whether Gladys or Aperture Labs would be in Portal the game, or if it was just sort of a joke for the trailer. So Chet and Eric decided to build ApertureScience.com to cement the fiction with the early fans, and to test some comedy narrative ideas. And this website starts out with like this terminal prompt, and after some investigation, opens up to this ludicrous questionnaire. And some of the questions were about cake, and hidden in the text was the secret message, "The cake is a lie." And all this happened while Portal was still in development. And back then, the game actually didn't have any mention of cake, and there wasn't any cake in the game at that point. It was just something we kind of talked about and joked about. But the cake was such a big hit with the website that we just had to find a way to work it into the game. And that led to the ending we ended up coming up with. So the site also was the first appearance of Cave Johnson, who became a more prominent figure in Portal 2. So we decided to announce Portal 2 by having fans uncover it inside of Portal itself. We added a mini game where players could find radios and carry them around, and they were trying to find these sort of hidden signal spots where they could hear these like weird sounds. And those sounds were these encoded images that led players to call a bulletin board system at Adam's house. And what we streamed out through that BBS was these ASCII images, which were the first screenshots of Portal 2 ever released. And over the next few days, Adam would periodically update that BBS with new screenshots for people to find as it went along. And after players uncovered all this, we also updated the end of Portal to show Chell being dragged back into the laboratory by the party escort bot. So the announcement ARG was extremely well received, and so we decided to ramp up to something really crazy for Portal 2's release. Some might say it was a little too crazy. But we gathered a bunch of indie guys that we're huge fans of, and we asked them if they'd be interested in doing this massive cross-collaboration kicking off on April Fool's Day. And so each game added several hours of new gameplay content and embedded puzzles and all kinds of stuff spilling out into the web and real-world spaces. And all this information led to the final countdown at Gladys at Home. One of our goals with this event was to create as much noise as possible. And since there was no consistent source of information, nobody knew what was designed, what was speculation, what was forged, what was trolls, what was bizarre coincidence. And so it just created this huge ball of chaos that took on a life of its own. And still, years later, people are speculating that anything that we say, or even this presentation, is part of the ARG, and it just goes and goes. So that was a big success for us and our partners. But for TF2, we wanted to see if we could get some of those same viral effects while scaling back the scope of the work to a much, much smaller team. So in celebration of the final Meet the Team video, Meet the Pyro, we wanted to get players excited about a big event coming, but we didn't want to spoil exactly what the update was going to be about. So in Team Fortress 2, players earn persistent items as they play over time, and they can craft them together into other things. And so we started dropping these mysterious junk items like banana peels and pocket lint and just other random stuff as sort of this misdirect with what we were actually planning. And each player could produce a single part of a large code by crafting 2 banana peels together. And this ended up causing thousands of players to form these roving packs of people who would hop from server to server, giving bananas to every other player on the server and saying, craft these together and give me your code, we just need this information. And it really, spread out within the community and got everybody involved. And at the same time, there was this smaller group of technically minded players who were developing tools to stitch all this information together, all these codes together, and they were verifying to make sure that everything was correct and not fake. And they were, making sense of the larger puzzle that was at hand. And within a few hours, we had 100,000 players that had participated and, revealed the riveting backstory of Monkey Not Poopy Joe. And all this tied into, the new map that came with the update, but was ultimately just sort of this red herring, so that when we released Meet the Pyro, it was a big surprise that, nobody saw coming. And in the end of this event, we burned all the mystery items into little piles of ash, which collectors could use to craft into other valuable items. So for Man vs. Machine, we wanted to do another one, but sort of scale things up just a little bit, while targeting the 2 groups of players that we stumbled onto in Pyromania. So we turned the grunt work of collecting codes into this fun activity of high-fiving as many people as you possibly could and collecting all their jokes, which were sort of these encoded messages. And for the technical players, we wrapped the puzzles in more layers of encryption and spanned a bunch of new interesting mediums, such as QR codes and printer spools and MIDI files and just all this fun stuff. And with those extra layers of encryption, it kept things going a little bit longer so that anybody who wanted to participate, even if they were in time zones that were sleeping when it started, still had a chance to contribute to it. And all of this unlocked a final recipe that required the community to come together and bring all this assortment of really unusually weird materials together. And when they crafted it, the results fired off this global alert to the entire community in the game with a link to the big new Team Fortress comic, which for the Team Fortress community is a really big deal. They really love when the comics come out and the forums light up with all this debate about what the story is and what it's going to mean for Team Fortress going forward. So what can we take away from all this? Well, we think it's possible to run these types of events on almost any scale, big or small, and still get a really good participation and reaction from the communities. We think it's really useful to call back to old mysteries, because it not only taps into the community's really creative and funny musings, but it also makes some of our accidents look like clues that we've been planting all along. And giving players a ways to repeat and verify the data within the ARG is a great way to combat the trolls who inject chaos into the systems if you want to have a really designed experience and a sort of a focused puzzle that you're going for. Kyle can talk a lot more about that. So plan for players who are going to have different levels of investment and skill. Leave fun collection activities to large groups and the tougher puzzles to the smaller technical groups, and let them form symbiotic jobs and tasks for each other. And that's the overview. I wanted to leave as much time as possible for you guys to ask us any burning questions you have. Looks like we have about 40, 50 minutes or something. So ask us absolutely anything, and if we don't get to you, you can always email us, and that's our email addresses.
Hi. Well, it's a question in two parts, more or less, but it's about this new Valve direction about going free-to-play and going multiplayer. First, how do you control all this new player-generated content in terms of keeping the lore? And how does this new direction affect, for example, I don't know, in a free-to-play environment, is it meaningful to discover what happened to the Borealis or whatever? You know.
Our players seem to really enjoy it. I mean, this is sort of tangentially related, but the people who play our games have been making extra content for them for as long as we've been making these games. And as the games go free, we now have more people that have more capabilities to make a wider variety of content. And so people that want to write fan fiction are going to write fan fiction, and that's not necessarily an official part of the lore. We have ARGs that are sort of officially part of the lore. We have ARGs that may wind up being officially part of the lore a year down the road if we decide that's something we want to do, or it might just be, you know, the craved ravings of a madman. But regardless, giving the community something that involves a game that they really enjoy, where they can contribute meaningfully to the game, but also to the community, that's fundamentally what this is about. And so being free or not, supporting user-generated content or not, we think there's lots of value in those things, but that value doesn't seem to be tied to this particular method of delivery. Does that answer your question? I'll take it.
Thank you. So you were mentioning about trolls injecting chaos into some of the games. Could you like say how they might have done that and what you might have done to combat that?
Yeah, so some examples of that, like I was talking about where in the Portal release ARG, the potato ARG, we didn't have a central location for where the game was taking place. It was just everywhere. And so anybody who had a YouTube account, which is everybody, could just put up a video that says, there's potatoes flying around, it's part of the ARG, and now you need to decipher my message. And everybody would freak out and be like, oh my God, this could be part of the ARG, we need to investigate. And they would start digging in and like saying, well, this guy's name is Justin Bailey, maybe it's related to Metroid, let's go to Metroid Prime, there's a code in Metroid Prime. Who knows, like, you know, whatever it is. And it would just branch out to this degree where somebody who gets joy from misleading people or making them waste their time can put up a website and say, my website is part of the Portal 2 ARG, please investigate. And so that is what trolls do. But it was really difficult to combat that, but it felt like the community was actually really, really smart about catching those things and seeing when there was weird inconsistencies or things that didn't really fit with the bigger picture. And they would call those things out immediately, like, you know, within the space of really a couple minutes, because these things go so fast. They would be like, do not trust information from this site, it is not correct, please trust information from this site. And they would sort of spread out those messages and do that work. But inevitably, there's always people who, you know, hang on to, no, this has to be the thing.
More concretely, for some of the things we did in Team Fortress, if you remember the banana error image that was up there, it had a whole bunch of codes in it sequentially. initially we would come up with designs where, for example, you as a user might be able to generate 1 pixel of this image. But then there's no way of differentiating between a user that generates a valid pixel and a user that generates an invalid pixel. And so if we give people sequences, then the community can write tools that say, we have 30 people reporting on this byte from all of these different sequences. And so the community wrote those tools, and they could track down everything that comes from this IP as a troll, or for one of the later ARGs, they got really, really good at figuring out which typos people had when they were copying and pasting these, because sometimes our letters look too similar. So it would solve all sorts of problems like that.
Do you want to speak? All right. There's also the problem of it's less kind of troll content, but just kind of mysterious-looking things on the internet, which they look mysterious. They must be part of the game, and it can be just kind of random kind of websites. I think for the portal to announcement ARG, there's someone running some like an aperture photography website, and players in the space of about 10 minutes all decide, oh, this is part of the game. It looks kind of, well, it has the word aperture on it.
Yeah, even though the website's been up since 2002.
Yeah, and I think they were trying to call someone or whatever, and it's like, no, it's not part of the game. There's no kind of concrete link from the game to that. There's no kind of definitive thing you can say, yes, that is part of the game. So yeah, watch out for people kind of just finding things on the internet, however long they've been there already, and declaring they're part of the game. You need this kind of logical connection that people can definitively say, yes, I went from there to there, and the game absolutely says that this new destination is still part of the game.
Yeah, so to go back to what Kyle was saying about this banana error, just to call out exactly what's happening here. The code 222 is essentially an offset in the full set of data where your bytes live, and then the hex values after that are the bytes at that offset. And so each player has a unique spot where they're going to relay the data that is of part of the larger set. So somebody who has code 223 would start at 0x62 and then 0x40 and then continue 1 byte after what this player has. And so because of that, all the data coming in, and again, the community built these tools for themselves essentially, they could find where there was overlaps, and they could find where people had uploaded false information and say, this doesn't match the 6 other people who say that it's actually this. So that's the verifiable data that we're sort of talking about. And the repeatable aspect is that there's no piece of information that goes out to only one player who might then get hit by a bus and never tell the rest of the community what they found. There's always somebody else who can get that piece of data through random chance.
How long did it take for that to play out?
Which?
Pyromania ARG.
The Pyromania ARG was pretty short. I think it was like 3 hours.
It was.
Yeah, you know more than
The Pyromania ARG was within the space of a day. We actually we wanted that one to be solved within 24 hours. So when you look at that image, there's a bunch of gimme things, like if you've ever done engineering work, you'll recognize those are hex codes for single bytes, things like that. This was the first time we'd ever done something like that inside the game for TF, and so we wanted to kind of sort of get the community's feet wet. For the man versus machine ARG that came immediately after that, our goal was to make it take, I think we were shooting for about 3 days to make it through the weekend, and we hit 36 hours, which we were really, really proud of. But the problem is the more interesting a challenge you put in front of the community, the higher the skill level and the more people that are going to be interested in solving it. So we didn't quite make 3 days, but 3 to 24 is not bad.
The Portal 2 announcement ARG, as a vague ballpark figure, I decided, it might take 7 hours from the initial update going live to people logging into this kind of 1980s style BBS, and I was kind of scarily accurate. It took I think it was 7 hours 16 minutes, and of course I claimed it was this kind of amazing sixth sense I had, and not really. To kind of see the whole of the internet kind of busy solving problems, it can be like this kind of huge tide just sweeping in. And following forums, and it's really important kind of seeing where people have started solving things. and you'll see some initial post. Someone says, "Oh, this decodes to this," or whatever. Or, "Oh, I recognise this bit of information," and it's his first post on this particular topic, and then everything kind of follows through on that. Then maybe, I don't know, 10 minutes later, it's old news, and it's pretty amazing to see in action.
So for the Aperture Science one, it actually took several days, but for a very interesting reason. We created aperturescience.com, put it online, and we never told anybody that this website existed, like, anywhere. We're just like, somebody at some point will randomly type this URL and say, what is this? And so it took several days before they found it. And then once they found it, they got in within maybe 2 hours or something. It was really quick, but it was sort of the fun of going through the questionnaire yourself and reading all the hilarious stuff that Eric and Chet could write.
Hey, how did you guys... Whoop.
Where are you coming from?
Over here.
Oh.
Hey. So how did you guys initially know that an ARG would be right for your players?
So that's a great question. With Aperture Science, it was sort of just a shot in the dark. Like we were saying, it was really just an experiment of like, but, we'll see what we can do with this and what turns up. With Portal 2, the announcement ARG, and maybe you can speak more to this, but we had a pretty big fan base from Portal 1 who were really interested in finding out what we were working on next. So we knew they'd at least want to investigate. But partially theming it with the game, we were like, Portal is a puzzle game, and so if we're giving them puzzles, we feel like these are kind of the thinking type of player who really wants to dig in and figure out what's going on here and solve those puzzles. So I don't know if that means that ARGs are only for the puzzle audience, or that if you're making an action game, your ARG needs to include like chopping watermelons or something. I don't know, but I think that was one of the things that we felt confident about, is that our puzzle-solving fan base could go and solve some puzzles.
For the Portal 2 announcement thing, before I started work at Valve, I built a Half-Life 2 mod called Minerva, and I just stuck it on the internet, and kind of one thing led to another. Half the internet seemed to download it, and I eventually ended up with this job at Valve. And to announce it to the public, I built this kind of mini kind of ARG style puzzle, and it was just this kind of bare data file, which turned out to be audio encoded in some old Unix type fashion, and it's contained a kind of fake numbers station, this kind of noisy string of spoken digits in Polish. And people kind of listened through this thing and assembled all the digits together and discovered it's a EBCDIC encoded string, this old kind of non-ASCII text encoding, giving kind of a brief message and GPS coordinates, which happened to be of the Valve headquarters. And so that's how I kind of rolled. And after a year or so at Valve, when we were kind of gearing up to announcing Portal 2, we had this kind of big spread, kind of big exclusive arranged in, I think it was Game Informer magazine. And I mean, that would be great for the general public, but kind of what about these kind of real kind of Portal fans, kind of people who absolutely lived and breathed all the fiction? And we thought, how would we kind of let them find out first? And in keeping with the co-op aspect of the game, this kind of collaborative element to it, thought, well, an ARG could be interesting. And I mentioned what I'd done before, and kind of one thing led to another, and we ended up with it. We ended up with this 1980s style BBS in my apartment.
So you said that you had like a vague ballpark figure of like 7 hours, and you said you had like 24 hours as a cap for the pyro thing, and then you said someone would like eventually find the website. So like, how do you go about determining like kind of like the constraints of one of these puzzles? And have you ever had to like step in and like intervene as like an anonymous third person, like, just someone on the internet?
So for the Pyro one, it's probably easiest to talk about. So we had written the code that would generate sequences for users, and we knew what range of users on Steam would get which starting positions and how many bytes in the offset and things like that. And so we could actually run the math and say, okay, we have a player base of, let's say there's 100,000 people, and statistically some percentage of them are going to participate. And so if 10% of those participate, they're going to immediately cover this percentage of the code. But in order to cover the rest of it, like, they're going to need to wait for another 200,000 users to come online. And just looking at our player curve, it's going to take about this long. But at the same time, it's like, okay, if this event runs for 24 hours, then there will have been so many millions of players online that we expect that they would have covered the search space by then, or covered a significant enough portion of the search space that they would effectively brute force the rest of it. What we didn't expect for the Pyromania one was that everyone would be so excited that they would invite every friend they ever had. And so in the course of an hour, like, we would have 10 times our usual player count doing nothing but traveling from server to server, yelling at people to craft bananas. Lessons learned.
Yeah, I remember. So the Portal 2 release ARG, which went on for weeks. It was a very long one that went in several stages, and it wasn't just this larger, like, meta structure that tied it all together, but each game had its own set of very complicated puzzles that were very, very deep. Like, to this day, there's actually some, not just some, a lot of details that I don't know because it was so complicated. But there was cases. I can't remember the exact one, but there was one of the games did this cool community thing where players who were trying to solve the puzzle and they were kind of confused about part of it, they invited them to come into the studio like late at night. It was like, almost midnight. Like, hey, come over to our studio and we'll work through this problem together with you guys. And it was kind of this cool community interaction there. So yeah, on occasion we've had to push things just a little bit forward.
Do you feel intimidated by the high expectations of players when you do an ARG?
Yes. There's, I think, nothing that I can regret in my life except for some of the mistakes that I made during that ARG. And so, yeah, it's really, really stressful and it's really scary, but it's also like a lot of fun. It's also the most alive I've felt at times.
I don't believe I stole the mic right after you said that. I mean, it's a very high pressure situation for sure, because especially you put content out there and then you spend the next 2 hours in your head going over every possible failure case there could be, because you're putting problems in front of users and they're spending millions of hours working on them. And so if you mess up and you waste millions of hours of their time, like, that's not a position anyone wants to be in. This is my chance to tell an anecdote about one of the guys who worked with me on the TF2 ARG, who's not here, and so he can't defend himself. We shipped the Man vs. Machine ARG, which had a similar base mechanic of strings of bytes and sequences, with the caveat that all of the bytes were encoded, and so until all 256 bytes had been discovered, it would be really difficult to peg specific values. He calls me drunk at 1 in the morning on his third glass of wine, let's say, terrified that we have no queues in the data set. We have all 256 bytes represented, except there are no queues. And so we have to go online at like 3 in the morning and behind the scenes add some queues into one of the data files where it doesn't matter so they can complete the set. So it's really, really high pressure, but it's incredibly rewarding. Like, you get to come up with a really interesting game design and ship it out and watch millions of people participate and get excited and go through this maze that you've designed to be a really fun experience. And you're matching wits with some of the smartest people out there. Like, it's a great ride.
Yeah, for the Aperture BBS, the actual thing with a modem, kind of living in my apartment, we decided to encode the phone number as an MD5 hash with some very specific format, and it was less as a puzzle and more just to make absolutely sure people got the right phone number and didn't get kind of, I don't know, most of the digits and started guessing at a few and accidentally phoned the wrong people. So it ended up being this rather tricky kind of brute force cryptographic problem, running through every single possible US phone number, calculating the MD5 hash, and checking it against this one kind of encoded in these slow scan television images, and just to make absolutely sure there were no kind of false collisions, whatever. I wrote a script which ran through or several billion US phone numbers just to make absolutely sure, and also to make sure I encoded the right phone number in the right way. And it's kind of slightly scary, this entire puzzle, depending on me not making a typo in this small script.
Which one's your favorite ARG and why?
You go first. I'm a slow thinker. Let me think. I'm still thinking through this.
I have no favorite. Cheater. I mean, they're all really, they're appealing to different people in different kinds of ways. So, I mean, really, I have no favorite. There are things where I think we solved specific problems really well. I think for the man versus machine arc, we had really, really high participation because we targeted these different levels of interest really well. So some people had fun running around high-fiving strangers on the internet, and some people had fun just staring at MD5s, trying to figure out what they could possibly mean. And these guys had a way of communicating with each other such that everyone was really happy. But then you look at something like the scope of the Portal 2 launch arc, and it's unreal. And I mean, every single one of these things we've done has something that's just absolutely amazing. And every time Adam says the BBS in my apartment, I laugh. So favorites for all kinds of things.
Yeah, so the favorite for me was definitely the potato ARG, now that I think back on it. And it was that it went for such a long amount of time, and that we'd been planning it for so long, but also like the really great people that I was working with. Like I was saying, the indie guys who helped us with it and did pretty much most of the work. We were huge fans of them, like the games that they'd made, and so a lot of them I'd never met before, and so bringing them into the office, I was like, oh, I'm meeting like all these people, all these games that I love, and like just hearing their creative processes and like how they were, just brainstorming on coming up with what kind of puzzles can we do and like what can we make out of this, and what a cool event it could be. And then, once we'd launched into it and it was live, seeing all the reactions, and we'd built this wiki page and an email alias where we were chatting just all the time. And as this was going on, we were emailing each other like, here, check out this thing on Kotaku, or check out this thing on Reddit, or whatever, like all this funny stuff going on. And we were just having such a fun time, like watching it roll by and seeing how it evolved over time.
Yeah, I think the BBS in my apartment thing. I mean, I've spent years kind of messing around with old computers and getting them to do ridiculous things. A few years ago, I got my old Atari ST on the internet, as you do, and it was this moment of all these ridiculous things I was doing, and this kind of phone line ringing off the hook, kind of. Someone would dial in, spend 5 minutes on the BBS, it would kick them off, then hang up, then immediately someone else would dial in. And it was this brief moment of, I've built this utterly ridiculous old thing with a modem from 1987, with a phone line I had to set up at my apartment because Valve phone systems were too modern. And it was this utterly ridiculous thing I've built. And it's working. It's doing things. It's basically the first publicity for this many multi-million-dollar computer game, and it's in my kitchen, and I'm getting paid for it. It was this gloriously surreal moment, and yeah, good fun.
I can yell. As someone who's missed a lot of these and have played a lot of your games, is there some way to replay or relive this experience? And maybe the second part of that is, do you do anything to time delay the, so the guys that are sleeping when it starts can still participate?
Yeah, great question. So these are a bunch of the indie guys who worked on the Potato ARG, and that web address, which is annoying, but you can obviously Google it, is a postmortem that one of the guys, Rob, did, which kind of details the entire process, not only of how we created it, but sort of how it unfolded and a lot of the lessons we learned. So that's one of the ways you can relive some of the potato stuff. A lot of the content that those guys created was actually, I mean, it was really full-fledged, like big, like free DLC update stuff, like really meaty stuff, and a lot of them left it in their games. Sometimes in like a hidden place, sort of behind a password, but sometimes in a more accessible place. And so a lot of the content they created, you know, in like Tokitori or in Cogs or whatever other games were there, is still there for you to play, and you know, a lot of the hidden stuff is still there. I don't know that you'd want to try and like solve all the meta puzzles on your own, because you know that took thousands of people, thousands of man hours to all put together. So that I don't know how you do that part unless you know you do the Potato Fool's Day revival group. Let's do this again. You know, that would be kind of cool actually, but. And then the aperturescience.com is actually sort of no longer there. Right now it's showing this, which is the Holiday Vault. After the aperturescience.com one ended, and Portal 1 was a big hit, and the Companion Cube was a big hit, we were like, oh, we should put the Companion Cube in you know, next to a Yule fire. That'd be kind of cute for Christmas. So that's what that is now, but when I was doing research for this presentation, there's actually somebody who mirrored the original Flash website, so you can go and play with that console terminal. What about the TF ones?
The code that drives all of these is really, really bad. Like, the check-in notes aren't descriptions of what they do, it's just apologies for checking it in, kind of bad. So the actual content doesn't exist anymore inside, for example, the TF ARGs, but all of the steps that people took get documented on the wikis that the community runs. So if you have interest, if you're just curious what it was like, actually being the guy who was up at 5 in the morning who figures out that we've put Morse code in a MIDI file for some bizarre reason, like you unfortunately don't have the opportunity to be that guy, but you can find out that he did this at 5 in the morning and that someone else was waking up in England at that time. And they managed to pick up the chain and go from there. And they'll walk you through the entire process and what they learned. And then even better, they have an open mysteries section at the end, which is either an indication that we missed something, or more usually it's super inspiring, because this is all stuff that we can just sort of put in the next one, or that maybe we already put in the next one.
The radios added to Portal 1, I think that they're all still there. If you complete the game once, it'll unlock them. Then if you go through, it's still got the radio collecting mechanic, and they still play sounds. You can still decode those sounds. You can put all the information together and still get the phone number, but I have no idea what the phone number will lead to now. There's probably some poor soul moved to Bellevue, and they keep getting strange calls from modems from across the world, and I think, what is going on here?
Hi. Sorry. These things obviously take tons of planning, absolutely tons of planning. Is there any point in any of the organisation where somebody sits you down and slaps you around the head and says, look, no, that's too far, don't do that?
I'm going to try to answer this question as best I can. So I remember with the Portal 2 announcement ARG, Josh and a couple of the guys who were kind of brainstorming, like, hey, you know, we're thinking about doing this, sort of sent out an email to a lot of people saying, hey, this is something we're thinking about doing. And I think the title of the email was Awesome or Failboat. And they wanted us to respond like, hey, please, please don't do this, or please, please do this. And you know, everybody was kind of on board with it. There wasn't really anybody saying don't do this. But they definitely tried to verify it with other people. They didn't just, you know, start running and, you know, do something crazy without anybody knowing. The Potato ARG, as far as I know, started with Gabe. It may have started with somebody else, but it was sort of like, you know, everybody was like, man, this is, you know, this really exciting idea to get all these guys working together and start, you know, pushing content from each other's games into each other's games and do this thing. It was just this really exciting thing that we all just wanted to do. There was never a point where, well, so when we brought everybody into Valve, we didn't say, hey, let's do this thing. We said, hey, we're thinking about getting you guys to help us with this. Do you want to do it? Like, again, we were saying, is this failboat? We were posing that question, and you know, they could have easily just said, this is a terrible idea. We're going home and working on, something else. But, they were excited about it too. They thought it was an interesting idea.
So after the giant many-tentacled monster that was the Portal 2 ARG, one of the goals of running the sort of mini ARGs inside TF was to answer the question, can we do something that is smaller scale and interesting to our users with much less development cost? I wouldn't say much less planning.
I'm saying it's a couple days worth instead of months.
Yes, much less planning. But specifically, it was a really small group of people who tried to come up with a really specific scope of problem. And then we did a basic implementation of it to see, is this something our users are interested in? Like, will this get people excited? Or is there a certain minimum scope? And if we don't cross that threshold, then just no one will even be inspired to participate. And so we found that even if you have like a tiny handful of people for 2 or 3 days, you can put together something really, really compelling that will get a bunch of people inspired and excited and working on the projects.
Is there any still unsolved ARG that no one has ever noticed? Or do you have a plan if no one gives a damn about one?
That sort of solves itself, which is great, which is if people don't care about the stuff that we made, it just kind of goes away, and we can pretend like it didn't happen. So that's nice. That hasn't happened yet, fortunately. I'm sure there's been some unsolved mysteries. I remember, like in the Potato ARG, there was a few places where communities found very, very smart kind of shortcuts where they kind of cut through a few of the puzzles. And I don't know if they went back and figured out what was the real solution to this rather than the brute force solution. But I feel like there may have been still some unsolved things there. I actually completely forgot to mention it all in this presentation. For Portal 2's first free DLC that we did, the co-op update, we actually did a mini ARG within inside of that, where we had numbers in each of the test chambers, and these were part of, I think it was like a Russian something.
Code page 855, a Russian string, and no one at all got it.
Yeah, so that one was, we just kind of left it to see, when people would pick it up and, how long it would take. And it sat for probably a few weeks before somebody said, what are these numbers? Like, what are they? And they really, started investigating. It was a much, much smaller group, maybe just 100 dedicated people at its max, I'm guessing, who were kind of crunching on the problem, and they actually went on it for months and months before they kind of really figured out what it was and resolved it. But that was actually sort of tying up some loose ends from the Potato ARG and even going back to the announcement ARG.
I was wondering, for the longer-term games like the Portal 2 ARG, do you ever kind of play off of the audience impressions and alter or embellish as you go, or is it just all masterfully planned from the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, that was actually a key part of it. I mean, it's weird to say that we improvised by planning that we were going to improvise, but that's kind of what we did. Is we knew that there was some missing gaps and there was some space where we could fill things in that we didn't know what exactly was going to be there until we started getting all the reactions from the community. And yeah, in the Potato ARG, there was a bunch of cases where we were spies within the communities and their message boards where they were trying to solve these problems. And we were watching all the people who were setting up all these tools or who were talking about things or solving specific parts of it. And we started working the names, mostly screen names, of those people back into the ARG in funny ways, where we'd start referencing the people who were working on it, and it was kind of creeping them out, like, oh God, they're watching us. And there was the thing where we had something where somebody had I think they climbed up a large telephone pole somewhere in the Netherlands, and the guys who had set that up were actually filming it from an office across the street, watching this guy climb up this pole and find this clue. And so a couple days later, they posted the video of that guy, from the perspective of like a security camera, and we worked that into the ARG. We did all these funny things, kind of playing with people's heads, and there was stuff like, for example, things that we just didn't hit us where. Portal 2, spelled out TWO, has the word potato within it if you capitalize some of the letters. And so when the community discovered this, we're like, I don't know how we never saw that, but it's really interesting. And so we started using, that sort of nomenclature, I guess, for the ARG itself in a bunch of funny ways. There's a million stories like that. This is probably the last question. We're low on time.
Yeah, I was hoping you guys could speak to maybe designing for the scale of your community, because you've talked about how in a lot of the ones you've done, you have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of users. So how would you design one that was for a smaller community, or how would that differ?
So I bet Kyle will have a different answer than me. But one thing that we did find with the Potato ARG and Aperture Science, and actually a few of the others, was there is actually a very large and dedicated ARG solving community who doesn't really know about our games or isn't really a fan of Valve or anything. They're just in it for the ARGs. And so as soon as they hear about something starting up, something mysterious somewhere, they go and start investigating these things. And so it actually brings in a bunch of new people who weren't aware of our stuff before. And so even if you have a small community, you actually start branching out to this larger group of people who are interested in the metagame itself.
That would probably be part of my answer as well. Some of the biggest contributors in terms of high technical skill to some of the Team Fortress ARGs aren't Team Fortress players. They were graduate students at MIT who emailed us later to thank us for giving them something interesting to do during finals week. I think like anything else, there are a bunch of tools you have at your disposal, and you have a bunch of knobs that you can tweak. So if we had smaller participation, we could have made the byte strings longer. We could have made fewer actual strings of content. If we thought we would have more participation or more participation of a specific type, we could have adjusted things that way. So building systems that give you the flexibility to sort of realize you were wrong and sort of nudge the game in the right direction without changing the rules out from under the people who are working on it, that gives you a place to start. And then once you've done it once, you can start iterating based on that design, and you'll know a lot more after doing it once with your community than we could possibly tell you right now.
I found that kind of when building puzzles, if you have kind of if you have them kind of built out of small stages where you solve that particular stage and something interesting pops out, it might be mysterious, but if it's kind of say you've decoded an image or whatever, and something legible but mysterious pops out, you solved that section. And I mean, making it a group of these smaller jumps rather than kind of this huge leap of faith where you have to decode one thing, you get noise out, then you have to decode it another way. Then even if you do have many people, that won't get solved. But if you have these kind of individual stages, then as with that kind of Polish number station I built, I think there's probably maybe, I don't know, almost 100 people involved with that one, and it got solved within 24 hours. And if you get the kind of more technically minded people involved, then there'll be some tiny fraction of the audience, but they'll get things done, and they'll decode these stages. The interesting things will pop out. Then the kind of wider audience will see these kind of mysterious things. Oh, what's going on there? And works pretty well like that. And don't think it's described anywhere, but actually wrote an article on, was it Gama Sutra? If you search for, I think, Adam Foster Gama Sutra, you'll find it, and it's about some of the kind of puzzle design implications in the Portal ARG.
So we're out of time. Thank you so much for coming. This was really fun.